This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
We may not have named it, but many of us have experienced anxiety over the past few years as we've negotiated tremendous change, increased division on the national and on the personal level. I know that I can feel like I'm back in gym class, like middle school, and it's time for the agility test. Only this time, it's all about emotional balance and coordination. Well, welcome to Family Life's Inside Out, where we talk about how God transforms His people from the inside out. Today we'll be talking about anxiety, the ways to thrive as Jesus followers in a world that doesn't promise to become more ordered or soothing. I'm Martha Manikas Foster, and my guest is biblical counselor Kathryn Weber, author of the 2025 Gospel Coalition article, How a Redeemed Imagination Frees Us from Anxiety's Power. Welcome to Inside Out, Kathryn.
Thanks for inviting me on the show, Martha. It's great to be here with you.
I am looking forward to hearing from your expertise. I think, Kathryn, it would be good to start here. How would you describe what's going on in our bodies when we face what feels like nonstop changes or challenges, and maybe even exhaustion from like a feeling of constant vigilance or wariness?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. So I think I'll start with kind of how our bodies are designed to respond to danger, and then I'll go ahead and try and connect that with what happens when anxiety becomes, as you said, like a constant presence. Because I think there's some very real physical reasons exhaustion is the natural outcome if we're living on the edge for too long.
Okay.
So our nervous systems are essentially designed to operate in two modes, what we'd often hear as like fight or flight and then rest and digest. And so when we face a threat, which is what anxiety says, right? It's saying, I believe something I love is under threat, and whether that threat is real or perceived, when we face it, in God's good design, our bodies respond automatically. And so I'd say, think about the last time someone startled you, or perhaps closer to home with these crazy winter storms, right? Like, when's the last time you slipped on ice? What happened? Without conscious thought, your body's nervous system went into high alert, right? Internally, hormones like adrenaline and cortisol flood your system, and they act as messengers to ready your body for action. And you can think of it like a captain of a ship saying battle stations. Okay. And then in response, your heart rate's going to go up, digestion's going to slow as blood is diverted to help your muscles be ready for action. Your liver releases glucose into your bloodstream as this like emergency fuel. And these are just like, this is just a small glimpse of what's happening. I'd say you could like summarize it as normal body functions get suspended to prioritize action related to whatever threat we're facing.
Yeah, that's a great picture. Thank you. Yeah.
The problem comes, though, in that we're only supposed to be in this state temporarily. Fight or flight's only meant to be a temporary state. And so we can function in it for a while, but our bodies need to return to rest and digest. So repair and sleep and digestion and normal things can happen. When that doesn't occur, when the nervous system stays on high alert continually, it's like, think about it when you're in your car. If you're holding the gas pedal down while the car is in park, over time, just this constant vigilance is going to burn out our bodies. And it's going to lead to not just exhaustion, but things like poor sleep or digestive issues or weakened immune system, inflammation, and more, just because, our body is wearing down. And I know most of us aren't living in obvious danger all the time, but anxiety doesn't just respond to extreme situations, right? It's identifying, I think I said, our real and perceived threats, and those can be internal or external. But regardless, when we face those, the distress we feel is real, and so the physiological response is real.
Well, that's a helpful description of how we can be constantly on edge. But every new news cycle can, depending on how often we check, can really just ramp us right back up to that, so that we're constantly at that level and not taking the time for the rest and the digest that you're talking about. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think when we live in that state of constant stress and we run our bodies in that mode that's not meant to be permanent, and we start to experience these chronic things like anxiety and fatigue, I think this is where God's invitation to find refuge in Him when we're afraid, to calm and quiet our souls, as Psalms 131 would describe, that these aren't invitations that are separate from our physiology. They're actually really good news, profoundly good for our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, come to me, all you who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest.
Yes.
So Kathryn, you say in your Gospel Coalition article that anxiety is this natural response to certain situations, as you really helpfully described to us. but it can also become distorted, as you have described, and what's going on in our bodies. You say that repurposing our imagination can become a powerful force for clarity and courage. So I think we need a definition, Kathryn, of imagination, because I think a lot of us associate the word with daydreaming or childhood play. So what does it mean, and how would we reclaim or repurpose our imaginations?
Yeah, I'd love to explore that. Before I do want to take a quick moment to just mention briefly that dealing with anxiety is complex, so especially when it's rooted in something like trauma. And so what we're talking about with exploring imagination and repurposing it is really helpful in any case of anxiety, but it often works best alongside holistic care, including counseling. So
Yes.
I just want to set the tone that tending your imagination is one important piece, but it may not be the whole picture.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that caveat. Yeah, I do appreciate
You're welcome.
that.
Yeah. So with that said, I think one of the best ways to describe imagination is that it's the eyes of the soul. And I've found as I've prepared for this article and our conversation that I think it's hard to briefly capture all the facets of it. But I think you could say imagination is an ability that we have to form ideas and images that aren't right in front of us. Take the phrase like, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? I think imagination is that idea on steroids. And so I think it helps us bridge this gap between, okay, I hear about something or I kind of know intellectually about something and I've experienced it, because I think it helps us see beyond immediate circumstances or even lived experience. And it lets us think creatively and problem solve and remarkably even like relate to each other more deeply. And so I think reducing imagination to just fantasy or escapism truly misses how essential it is to everyday faith, because it can give us this embodied vision of truth. And I think God regularly engages our imaginations, both through creation and scripture, to help us connect physical and spiritual realities, but it's never neutral, right? Like imagination's either going to be stewarded under Christ's lordship or co-opted by the world, the flesh, and the devil, which I talk about it a little bit in the article, but this became more visual for me when I watched Inside Out 2. And this scene where anxiety is enslaving the imagination center and just forcing this constant creation of rehearsals of worst case scenarios.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's just such a powerful picture that the reality is that our imagination is active and will work, but it'll either work for us or against us. And the real question is, who is discipling it and to what end? And so kind of getting to the second part of your question, Martha, I think this is where we start with reclaiming imagination, by recognizing it's not childish or optional, but it's truly an integral part of loving and living for God with our whole selves, right? It's how we exercise faith in an unseen God in a world where fear is loud and suffering is visceral. And so I think, just to make it a little more tangible maybe, I think another way you could conceptualize it, you can turn the diamond on imagination and see lots of different angles. But to put it really simply, I think imagination is to make an image in your mind, which would connect, I think, to what Jeremiah says in Lamentations, as he surveys not just a possible worst-case scenario, but actual real destruction of Jerusalem. He lays bare his experience of pain and dissonance before God in a runaway. And then there's this turn. In Lamentations 3:21, he says, "But this I call to mind, and therefore have hope." And then what does he do? He starts bringing images to mind of God's character and his promises, God's steadfast love, his great faithfulness. And I can't help but wonder if when Jeremiah proclaims God's mercies are new every morning, if he's not bringing to mind that image of manna that sustained Israel every day for 40 years in the desert.
Sure. So images that can come from remembering or imagining the best or imagining better. Would that work?
Yeah, I think, but not imagining the best based on like whimsy or like this is not reality, but actually like
rooted,
infusing truth. Yeah, rooted in truth. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. That's very helpful. You've written that with this repurposed imagination, God's truth and his goodness loom larger than the falsehoods and fears that try to dominate our minds, which you were just saying. So for those of us who are maybe hearing this for the very first time, could you describe a few practical ways that we can confront anxiety with this repurposed imagination? I'm almost even imagining or thinking that this is almost a way of putting us into the rest and digest mode rather than the anxiety, the fight or flight mode. But could you give us some practical examples? You've done it in the article, and they were so helpful to me.
Yeah, I'll do it a couple ways. I'll do it with walking through a few questions that you can ask yourself.
Okay.
And then I'll offer, just because I am helped by actual stories, and so I'd love to share just how this has played out for me, even this last week. So starting with kind of the questions and kind of stepping stones you could use, I'd say start with a question of like, who's holding the reins of your imagination? Because when anxiety is in the driver's seat, our imagination tends to narrow, and it's going to lock you into like only bleak outcomes. And the things that are not there are, there's no mercy, there's no grace, there's no Holy Spirit at work in and around you, right? There's no redeeming power of Jesus in play. So that's a good question, I think, to start with. And then I think ask the question, what are you feeding your imagination? You are what you eat applies to more than just the food we consume, because what we consume mentally and spiritually shapes us. So you can think of, am I immersing myself in things like social media feeds? Am I constantly obsessing over the news? Am I watching horror movies that
Right.
constantly inundating me with, just fearful or dark narratives? And those things are going to serve to strengthen anxiety's hold on the reins of your imagination. On the other hand, if you're nourishing your imagination with beauty and goodness through good fiction, beautiful art, stories of God's faithfulness, you begin to stoke to life kind of what you could say is like a holy offense against anxiety. And then a third question you could ask yourself would be, what in my current context helps me orient towards God? So for me, a lot of my imagination has been shaped through the water, because I served in the Coast Guard and then I taught swimming lessons. And so over time, I've seen just biblical truth come alive through learning to navigate ships and teaching people to float instead of panic. So I think that question can help people realize, like, you don't need to completely change your context to reclaim imagination. You might just need some new lenses to view the world around you.
Yeah. Now, would it be too A-type personality for me to say that at the beginning of the change to start incorporating this, we might even schedule time for rest and play?
Absolutely.
So you could say, this is my time to sit down and read a really good novel. I'm going to start a garden, or I'm going to go tend my garden when it's not snowy and icy outside, of course. So that might be a way you could start that.
Being intentional and making the space for it is important, and then also inviting other people in so that you're not trying to do it alone, because anxiety thrives and imagination gets distorted in isolation. So I think both of those, setting aside time and then inviting other people in, are two important ways that God is going to help break this stronghold, because he's one who breaks strongholds. But yeah, so personal example from even just this last week. So winter storms abound.
Yes.
Between that, with some house maintenance thing and mortgage things, and then a car that decided to die on me, and some difficult work meetings, I think God gave me the opportunity to live this out in my own life, because it felt like one hit after another. And so with each new problem that arose, I could tell my own imagination was tempted to live in worst case scenarios. I mean, an example being like, had a pipe freeze, so the natural progression of that goes, okay, the pipe's going to burst, and then it's going to be thousands of dollars of damage, and then there's going to be mold, and I'm going to taxes about, you know the slide.
Yes.
But I think for me, the fear that loomed largest this past week was all of this happened in the midst of kind of a resurgence of familiar heaviness emotionally and some trouble sleeping. So for context, I've struggled with depression and insomnia for years, and so when those feelings come, my imagination has plenty of experience to draw from to create for me this slide of like, of course you're going to slide back into melancholy and sleeplessness, and that's inevitable, and it's going to be permanent this time, right? It felt like for me, with each hit of a circumstantial thing, I was becoming less quick to reorient, and the fears were getting louder, and it was harder to not give in to the despair pull of anxiety for these different situations. So kind of throughout the week, I had to desperately lean on many of these practices I've described. I pulled in some trusted friends who actively helped me interrupt those spiraling moments day by day, moment by moment, to pull me out of the worst case scenarios and help me reorient to truth. I have a playlist of music that I would say is like, it baptizes my imagination, right, in nourishing things.
Nice.
I have an Ebenezer box, which is just this collection of notes or trinkets or photos that are reminders to me that help me call to mind specific examples of God's past faithfulness, and those memories of how God's met me in the past can then help me reawaken hope for the present. In and through all this, just praying, and sometimes very weakly, to help myself come back from living in these godless, bleak fantasies to the present moment where God is present and active.
Mm-hmm.
And in the midst of this, I think the biggest connection, I think, to imagination here is, as I was watching a show with some friends, a new kind of image emerged for me. So in this scene that I was watching, a character who's an artificial intelligence, her power only works when she's connected to the afterlife. And she's been disconnected from it, and is in this fight where she's just getting knocked down over and over and over again. And in the last-ditch effort of the enemies to kind of press her out of the fight through this portal, as she's being pressed against it, she suddenly realizes her power is restored. And that image fused in my mind in that moment with Spurgeon's quote, "I've learned to kiss the wave that presses me against the rock of ages." Mm. And it just caused me to reflect that as like Christians, we're often pressed down, even as Proverbs says, well, we may fall 7 times. And that's anxiety is going to keep pushing you to these places of you've got to avoid falling down. You've got to avoid these worst case scenarios. But as Proverbs said, even if we fall, like 7's the number of completeness, even if we are knocked down completely,
mm-hmm.
the righteous will rise again. We won't be cast headlong. Instead, we get to be pressed into the rock of Christ himself. Mm. And in him, as his strength is made perfect in our weakness, we rise. And so I got to see God use my imagination to take what began as discouragement
yes.
to become a vivid reminder in my weakness that even if I'm pressed down, I get pressed into my source of strength. Uh-huh. And nothing in my circumstances is fully resolved. I'm still dealing with some of them even as of yesterday. But I think I got to see something shift and truth have more staying power. I think it was Thursday night. And there was just a little bit more of a stabilizing piece that meant I wasn't as dependent on the outcomes of those things. Uh-huh. And I know I'll need to reorient again. I already have since Thursday multiple times, but that's okay because this isn't a one-time exercise. It's an ongoing way of life as we follow Jesus. And I think I said it before, like it's not based on wishful thinking. It's actively filling our inner world with the promises and character of God. Mm-hmm. And so as we fight anxiety in a world of real threat, a redeemed imagination brings truth to life in a critical way for us day to day, right? As we mm-hmm. depend on and find refuge in Jesus for whatever we face. And so I think this is why we tell stories. I think this is why we sing songs and paint and share testimonies, right? To help mm-hmm. one another remember as we journey home. And it's so rooted in Ephesians 3:20, where like God has said, right, the one who created our imagination is redeeming it, right? That no matter what we ask for or imagine, he will do abundantly more with his power at work in us.
Yeah, what you ask for or imagine. Right, yeah. Wow, thank you. Thank you for coming from like all parts of you, your expertise as a professional as well as your personal stories. Thank you for helping to open our eyes to ways that we can understand anxiety, understand what it is, this feeling is, this discomfort maybe, giving it a name maybe for the first time, and how we can use our imaginations not to go down a spiral. And even if we do, that we can still come back, but that we could be using them in a way looking to Jesus and everything that he promises us as far as his desire to sustain us.
You're welcome. I pray God can use it to encourage people.
Yes, me too. So thank you, Kathryn. Thank you for all of this and for joining me here today on Family Life's Inside Out.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
My guest has been biblical counselor Kathryn Weber, author of the 2025 Gospel Coalition article, How a Redeemed Imagination Frees Us from Anxiety's Power. I'm Martha Manikas Foster with Inside Out on Family Life.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.